Well, hello and welcome to the Pastoral Thoughts Podcast. This is your host, Jack Young, and Brother Brad Baker from here at our church is in office today, and we're going to have a reading episode here on the podcast, and we hope and pray to be a blessing to you in regards to your own personal reading. We're talking about the reading of the Bible, reading of books, and reading in general, and we'll jump into, first off, the importance of reading. So, Brad... Yeah. He's a big reader in our church, and he's always handing me books, and I'm handing him books, and
it's really embarrassing, actually.
So he's one to talk about reading. Why is reading important? Why does it matter?
Well, I think that reading is important as it's one of the humanities for a reason. It's part of what makes us the types of humans that we were called to be as Christians as well. So my basis of knowledge I get from the Bible. Right. That's where I seek with the wisdom of God. And so in order for me to understand the Bible, I must be able to read it.
Right.
However it is that I read it, but the basis, like the start, sola scriptura, where we start is reading the Bible for what we believe and the way we seek wisdom.
What's some good tips for the folks on reading the Bible? We'll get into reading in general here in a minute.
You and I argue about this sometimes. I always say start at Genesis 1 and just go.
Yeah, amen. I definitely believe in the holistic. All Scripture is given by inspiration and is profitable. Somebody just got saved and they're trying to, muscle through something. I might tell them, read the book of John, read the book of Proverbs. Those are usually two books I point to. But yeah, I definitely believe that all church people ought to be reading continuously Genesis to the book of Revelation. And every portion of it is vitally important to your life. And develop a habit of Bible reading. First and foremost, it's not that hard to read through the Bible. Yeah. Was it 3 chapters a day?
It's 3, 4-ish, 4.5, depending on the day or the psalm.
So if you read 3 chapters today, 4 chapters tomorrow, and rotated it through the year, you'd be through in a year. I know a bunch of our folks here at Lighthouse Bible Baptist Church, we just read through the New Testament in the month of January.
Yeah, I'm waiting on my book. Didn't I win a book by reading the New Testament?
Hopefully the book, Pursuit of God, comes before this Sunday, because I know that there's going to be a bunch of people looking for that book because they won it, because they read through the New Testament. Some people said it was hard, and I think if you're a slower reader, it's going to take you about 30, 35 minutes.
Sure.
But right now, some of us jumped into the 90-day Bible reading program, and what I do is I don't do this often, but I'm doing it like I did it for the New Testament. I'm going to do it through the whole Bible. Listen to it audibly on Zondervan 2006, KJV, dramatized audio.
You'll listen to the dramatized one.
Yeah, sometimes it's annoying, actually. But
the problem with I will say, what we're talking about is listening to the Bible be read to you while you read the Bible. And but what I've noticed about when you listen to the dramatized one is that when you speed it up, like you go to like 2.5, 3x speed on it, all you get like these weird compression artifacts, and it starts to sound funky. Besides the guys talking to you in a faster way. So like I really like the plain spoken Alexander Scourby or the James Earl Jones one.
I was gonna say that in the dramatized, when the music's going really fast in the background, that's the most annoying part.
Yeah,
the talking is not that bad when it's talking really fast.
Yeah, when you get into like Joshua.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna hold this up. I was connected, but I realized I got a different phone, so I'm not connected audibly. But I was gonna play this for the folks over my mic. I'll see if this mic's up. This is 1.5 speed.
Chapter 42. Now when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his sons,
Why do ye look one upon another?
And he said,
Behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither, and buy for us from thence.
What's really great about listening to those dramatized versions of it, though, is that you, especially with the King James version of the Bible, you don't get any quotation marks in a lot of the printings of it. You don't get, you don't have clear indications as to who's speaking when. And when you listen to those dramatized ones, the people that produced that did that work for you. So you hear, you kind of can follow along that Joshua is speaking, and then Caleb is speaking, and back and forth.
And then if a woman is speaking, it's a woman's voice. Yeah. And they do, I mean, they get right into the background sounds. If it's in a crowd and Jesus is preaching, or they're talking back and forth,
right?
They try to make crowd sounds. And then if the disciples are on the sea, you'll hear the mast creaking, and then you'll hear the wind and the waves.
I always find it interesting in the New Testament when it'll say that the multitude or the crowd or the Jews spoke collectively, like how the dramatized versions play that out. Because like, how do 2,000 people all say the same sentence, and what would that sound like? Was it a chant or?
Yes. Well, and the funniest one to me on that Zondervan dramatized, and I've heard some other ones, but Satan sounds so evil.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm thinking, if thou be the Son of God.
If thou be the Son of God. Do you remember the old radio play Unshackled? They would always have, like, whenever they would have a Satan or a demon speaking to one of the people. Yeah. They'd always find like the most horrendous voice ever.
And I was thinking, if Satan used that voice with me, it would be really easy to say no.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
No, you sound really evil, man. I'm not going to trust you.
Yeah, when Satan tempts Jesus in the desert, he tempts him with something good. Like bread and water.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the rule of the world.
So, so I was going to say, when I'm listening to the Audible Bible on 2-speed, and it's really, if I played that for you, that was 1.5 I just played, but on 2-speed, it sounds fast if you're just listening to it,
right?
But to read along at 2-point speed is not too fast at all, and it took me approximately 35 minutes this morning,
right?
And so 35 minutes for the next 3 months, and I will be through the whole Bible in 90 days.
Yeah.
And so 35 minutes is not a lot of time for the most important book in the universe.
Right. I think in December of 2020, my New Year's resolution for 2021 was to read Genesis 1 through 11 every single morning, as best I could. Obviously, I did not read Genesis 1 through 11 365 times.
Yeah.
However, as often as I did it, I read Genesis 1 to 11, and not only did I get into, like you were talking about before, setting up a good habit, but also like listening to it audibly, reading it plainly, just kind of coming at it different ways.
I would encourage all preachers to do that. I hope you're expositional preaching at least some of the time, if not most of the time. G. Campbell Morgan said that before he would preach any message one time out of a book, he would read that book 50 times.
Yeah.
And that was before he started studying.
Right.
So he could totally get into it.
You have to like immerse yourself in the information before you can really start to explore it. If you start exploring it, that's great. And it might help you. But until you know it really well, until it's like part of like your synapse, like you've flexed that muscle in your brain enough, it doesn't quite ring the same way when you go to study it. Yeah,
absolutely. And there's going to be big holes in your study. Now, like what you're saying that, you're reading Genesis 1 through 11, which I think that's awesome. You set aside a whole year, and that's going to be the portion of Scripture that you're going to just learn and hide in your heart and be a part of you. Because if you do that, 10 years from now, you'll still remember that.
Well,
Scripture.
What's amazing is whenever you read Job, or whenever you read Matthew, or whenever you read Revelation, you just hear Genesis 1 to 11 in the back of your head the entire time. You're like, oh, that's like Lamech. Oh, the beast sounds an awful lot like Nimrod. Like
you're gonna live that book. So when you go into work too, you're gonna see Lamech. you're gonna see that that guy's got like Cain type spirit. And
I know we talked the other day, but like when you read Genesis 1 to 11 every day for a year, how do you not learn to respect the divine image of God in every human being you come across?
Right.
And it's like that just started with that habit.
Yeah.
Just with that habit.
Yeah. And so I always use this analogy. And Jim Caterly said the other day, you really like that analogy. Like, man, it's one of my favorite ones in the world. Is like, how do you get a post out of the ground? You can't just pull up.
You wiggle.
You wiggle it this way and pull it this way and back and forth. And so I think like learning the Bible and reading the Bible and getting the Bible into us, you got to wiggle that post 100 different ways.
Yeah. So we talk about the importance of reading, and then I'm saying the first most important thing to start reading is the Bible. Which means that if you're listening to this, I want you to take all the devotionals on your bookshelf and burn them.
Right.
No, they're very helpful. But I think that we both agree that it's
In
so
a-
important to just let the Bible, read it through, let it wash over you, so you're constantly assimilating the source material first, and then then start exploring it.
And I like a glass of milk with dinner.
Yeah.
But if your spiritual diet is devotionals, you are still a milk Christian.
Sure.
You got to get into the meat of the word and start chewing that and digesting it for yourself.
Right.
And again, yeah, I like devotionals. I don't use them very much, but that is the milk. Somebody has taken that scripture and digested it already and have given you a watered down version of the real thing.
And I would also add that when you start to read the Bible that way that we're talking about, just read the Bible cover to cover or section to section, passage to passage, you start to, you're able to discern when you read something like a devotional and you're able to discern how much it's really applicable or helpful for you. Otherwise, you're just kind of stuck with whatever the devotional said. About Jeremiah and how it's applicable to your purpose in life.
In most devotionals are very milquetoast, chicken soup for the soul, verse out of context.
Right. And you wouldn't know that.
No,
if
unless
you
you
didn't
studied
read through
it in its context.
Right.
There are some good devotionals out there that are like really rock rib doctrinally and everything.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so get in the Bible and read that for yourself. Try listening audibly to it and reading it if you have some reading comprehension. I made this point, and I probably got it from you or somebody else, but the Bible was written to be read out loud. And so the Bible was written to be heard first.
Yeah.
Because they didn't even have the printing press till
What did they do
1500.
What did they do when they found the law of Moses? They read it aloud and all day long and all night.
And so, like the Levites, they had how many courses? 28 courses or 18? 18 courses. I know that Zechariah was course of Abia.
Oh yeah.
That comes to my mind. But there's 24. I think there was 24.
Yeah, 12 times 2, I think is right.
Okay, 24 courses. So you spent approximately 2 weeks a year up working in the temple if you were a Levite. The rest of the year, you would be reading and expounding the law of God. And so if you were just a normal layman from the other 11 tribes, you go into your place of worship, particularly the synagogue in Jesus' time, and you would hear the law being read and you would memorize it. So again, it was written to be heard out loud.
Right. So I think it's important because Jim Alter brought this up a couple of weeks ago on your podcast, which is, the Bible that's in my hand right here is a codex, and it's a technology that was popularized by early Christians, which means that before the first century, it was a technology that had been invented in China, but didn't really exist anywhere else in the world, which means that if you're an ancient Israelite and the only access you have to the law of Moses is when somebody read parts of the Torah during worship or whatever you bothered to memorize, which often was a lot. But again, you're memorizing it without a written text.
And so that's why it's important also in churches that, they spoke to each other in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. We were talking about this. Martin Luther, when he was a monk, a lot of Catholics didn't learn the Word of God, but the Augustinian monks did. Every 2 weeks, they'd sing through the whole Psalter, all the Psalms. And so Martin Luther, by the time he got saved, the just shall live by faith, and he was saved. He had the Psalms memorized.
Right. Which sounds, and I was going to mention, that sounds crazy to a modern 21st century Christian or even any other normal human being. How would you memorize Psalm 119? I remember I went to a Christian camp, and one of the girls from our church memorized the entire Psalm 119. It was like,
wow. At camp?
At camp. That 1 week. And it's like superhuman, right?
Yeah.
But if you, like you're saying, if you're Martin Luther, right? And you have nothing to do other than sing through the Psalter every single day.
There's no
for
screens.
Years and years.
There's no screens.
You're
There's
not
no
distracted.
radio.
You're
no
not distracted
phone calls.
at night. There's all this brain power that you're not doing.
Yeah.
You're not balancing the ledger for your gas tank every day on your way to work.
So the girl that went to camp, she had a week straight to learn Psalms 119.
Yeah.
I know I've seen campers come back and like a handful of them. Our church in Oklahoma, they quoted all of James, the book of James.
Oh, wow, yeah.
They learned that at camp, and it was several of them, not just like one really, really smart kid.
Yeah.
It was several, and they memorized the whole book of James.
Right. And that's why you see in the Old Testament, you see that word consecration so much. It's like
Yeah.
that separated time to just focus.
Right.
Which is another good reading habit.
And and there was a time period where people could, and you still can, but they can memorize great lengths, a lot of material. We're talking about Karl Marx. He was talking about going to seminary or something at one point, but I know he had all the Gospels memorized.
That's insane.
He could quote them.
Right.
And a guy down in Waco, Texas, by the name of David Koresh, as a teenager, had the whole New Testament memorized.
Yeah, I remember I was watching a documentary on David Koresh, and they had a clip of when he actually called the news station, and he started off the top of his head quoting out of Revelation 17.
Yeah.
I have the gist of Revelation 17. I understand the seals and that he thought he was the Messiah and the second coming of Christ and all that. But he actually had verse and chapter for what he was talking about at the time, because he had consecrated that much time into his reading.
Yeah.
And again, it's not like he spent all of his time memorizing Revelation. He just been through it so many times that it starts to build relationships to his knowledge base.
And it burned into his mind. So you have two gates to your soul. You have the eye gate and the ear gate. And Revelation begins, with blessed are they that read, and blessed are they that hear this prophecy, the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein. So you have those two gates, and you have an opportunity to hear the Bible. And then also you have the opportunity to read the Bible and get it into your heart and your mind that way. And we can do a lot more than what we're doing right now.
Right. Yeah. Some people don't draw attention in this idea, but the reality is, in the secular world in the first century, Christians had, rightly or wrongly, a reputation for being dumb. Like, there's lots of external sources that'll say Christianity appeals to slaves, women, and like poor people.
Yeah.
Right.
And that was Jesus' ministry. Jesus
exactly.
people.
And so what that meant in that time, in that context, was, Christianity is for dumb people. Yet, ironically, the foremost leader in the first century of Christianity and its theological development was Paul, who was a well-learned Pharisaical Jew. So from the very beginning, Christianity had to push back against this idea that we are called to be stupid, even if it's only the perception. And so what reading can do for us as Christians is represent our beliefs in a way that is true to its source and its truth, which is, hey, we believe these things, but not only are we saying that, we have reasons for why we say that.
That's right. And my dad and I went and saw a crisis pregnancy center there in the city. Remember the name of it? Man, it's
we just looked at it too.
Yeah, I just looked at the pamphlet. But wonderful place. But anyway, bring on my dad. So he was a phys ed major, Brockport State, and he always made C's to like skate by so he could play sports. And he says how once he got saved, he immediately became an A student. And then we went off to Bible college. He was A's, and so I got saved at 22 as well. And immediately upon salvation, first thing that struck me is like reading the Bible. I grew up in church, but I didn't have the Holy Spirit inside me.
Right.
But now I'm reading the Bible, like just getting blown away by the truth that's in the Bible. And so not only did I have a whet appetite for learning the Word of God, but also for truth in general. And I myself became a student, and then started my journey becoming more of an avid reader, where before I wasn't really into learning.
And the Bible will teach you how to read. Which sounds kind of silly because there's no like phonetics in it, and there's no grammar. But the Bible, first of all, was used as a textbook to help people learn the English language.
Absolutely,
previously. Yeah. However, the really important thing to understand about the Bible is that we use the term hermeneutics, which is the process by which you use the tools to interpret a passage. Well, that is just as much a secular practice as it is a Christian practice. However, it developed from people wanting to interpret the Bible correctly. Hermeneutics comes from learning how to read well. right? And so
Right.
that started from the Bible
Yes.
as in the humanist and scholasticism of Christianity.
Yeah, learning how to interpret the Bible in its context, to whom it was written.
There are
written
some
literally,
really great,
grammatically, historically.
there's some really
that.
great biblical scholars that would not even identify as Christian, and so what's really interesting about that is that they learned how to read well from the Bible, and now they have PhDs in whatever their field is because they're a better philosopher because of what they learned in hermeneutics with the Bible, or what, so on and so
that
forth.
was the structure. The Bible was the structure for their education. And yes, and what happened after the Reformation, the printing press, religious liberty, democracy, the elevation of mankind to what I believe we've enjoyed today.
Sure.
Now secularism will, say Christianity was everything bad in the world, and then that was a humanistic enlightenment that elevated us, which really I wholeheartely disagree. I believe it was a propagation of the Word of God, and then also most people up until here the last couple hundred years couldn't read.
Yeah.
Even people in Christ's day.
That's why that's one of the reasons we know that the Bible was designed to be read originally, because in ancient times you'd be lucky to be in a mega metropolis, and if 10% of that population could read, that'd be like doing really
That's
good.
a very literate society.
And
for
that's
ancient.
like being able to read. That's not being able to compose or like even scratch out a
Right.
few letters. Like, it's just being able to read. Like, for instance, I can read Spanish. Don't ask me to speak it. Don't ask me to write in it, because I am very terrible at conjugating my verbs, and I don't even understand how
But you
prepositions
could order
work.
from a menu.
And I can order from a menu, or
Yeah.
I can read a book and just sort of grab a lexicon and get my way through. Like, even that level of literacy would have been like scribal stuff back in the ancient times.
Sure.
So that's why I often say, like, if you really want to start to understand the Book of Revelation, you got to listen to it.
Yes.
Because that's the way it was written in the first place. Like,
James Alter, when he was on here too, he said, regarding the King James, he said a lot of people who come to church, they're biblically illiterate. They haven't ever read the Bible before. They say, when I hear you read it from the pulpit, I understand it.
Yep.
But when they're looking on the page, they don't.
Yeah.
So again, you can hear it.
The King James Version of the Bible, its grammar, its punctuation is actually designed to be read. Like, for instance,
because of its rhythm.
Yeah,
and the
Elizabethan
metric.
English has a colon in places that we would never use today, because those were more like musical notes back in the day. And that would say, like, pause this much. A comma can sometimes function as a period, but it just means keep going.
Right,
Like-
right. And so, it was metered
Yeah.
for
yeah.
an audience inside of a congregation.
Yeah, it's one of the things I
being
appreciate
read
about
to.
that is
Yeah.
Jim Alter pointed out how, like, one of the objectives of translating the King James Version of the Bible was so that it could be read and sound good.
Yeah.
Like, nothing landed on this page without it sounding the best they thought they could make it.
Right. Yeah. Amen. And so you get saved, start reading the Bible, and sometimes people think that, man, the Bible's all that you should read. No, it is the book, singular.
Right.
It is the most important book, obviously. I mean, it is the preeminent book.
It's literally one of the reasons why we have books.
and so we can communicate with each other through the written word. And so you look at any great preacher. I got a bunch of quotes of yesteryear. A lot of people, for instance, like with Dwight Lyman Moody, D.L. Moody, simple shoe salesman, butchered the King's English. And now D.L. Moody always, from the time he got saved, he tried to correct his English.
Sure.
And he always tried to make up for his learning. No, he didn't go to Bible college, but he read thousands and thousands of books, besides being a great Bible student.
Right.
So I have somewhere like right over here, I can see his little red book behind you. It's 1,001 quotes from my library by D.L. Moody.
See, that's how you know that you're a fundamentalist, because I have a book like that, but it's C.S. Lewis quotes.
There you go. Yeah, C.S. Lewis is behind me somewhere in this closet. But yeah, D.L. Moody quotes from his library, and he's got thousands of books noted, 1,001 different books noted in the back of that one book. And so those are just highlights of books that he read, and he drew out quotes. Charles Spurgeon, great Spurgeon. Everybody loves Spurgeons.
Right.
Both fundamentalists and liberals love Spurgeon, quote him. But he had a library. It's at William Jewell College now, I think in Missouri or something like that. But 12,000 Puritan library.
Yeah.
12,000 Puritan volumes.
That's why I blush when you say that I read a lot, because I'm like, come on, that's not, no.
That's on a whole different level. But yeah.
Because supposedly,
I
don't know how true it is, but supposedly he read all of those.
He read all of them, and he could quote passages from them.
Yeah.
Like Pilgrim's Progress, I know Charles Spurgeon said he read it well over 100 times in his life. He never, at some point in his life, read Matthew Henry anymore because he'd been reading it since he was a child, and he knew what Matthew Henry said about a particular text of the Bible.
Right.
And so he didn't even need to look at Matthew Henry.
So then, devil's advocate, why do I need Matthew Henry to be a knowledgeable Christian? Why can't I just open up?
So Charles Spurgeon, I could tell you what he would say.
Sure.
He who never quotes will never be quoted, and he who never reads will never be read. And he who fails to use the brains of others proves that he himself has no brain. And that's Charles Spurgeon right there.
Right. Yeah. I was in a Bible study that I'm in. We went through the book of Job, right? And a lot of people associate Job as sort of like a book and a treatise on theodicy, right? Explain evil and suffering in the world. Why would a just man like Job go through the hard times that he did? And one thing that really I didn't even catch until about 2 weeks ago was that when God responds to Job personally and answers his plea for, just some FaceTime, because like, what's going on here? God does not address his suffering. He addresses his knowledge.
Yeah, that's very good.
And what do you know? And the answer
answer me, Job.
Yeah.
Where were you?
Right. And so I believe this is kind of like my soapbox.
Yeah.
But I believe that a part of being a good Christian is seeking wisdom and knowledge. Otherwise, because I think that God put that invitation in the Bible.
And who said all truth is God's truth?
Yeah.
Somebody did.
Somebody important. Somebody smarter than either of the two of us.
And so there's a lot of truth out there that mankind has come across and thought about, and we can use the minds of others and use the brains of others. And my thing is too, like I love listening to preaching. I listen to preaching a lot, but I know I do a little bit of writing, pastorjack.org, but do a little bit of writing. But preaching is a lot different than writing,
right?
And it's communication on a completely different level. So
it's persuasive in its intent.
Yes, and usually it's well articulated and well thought out.
Sure.
And it's not as conversational. It's relying a lot of facts. I mean, you might be illustrating and doing different things, but I mean, you have to streamline it. It's a lot of work. And so if I would listen to preaching, listen to someone speaking, why wouldn't I read somebody writing?
Exactly.
Or if I'd have a conversation, or like, let's say you were Charles Spurgeon sitting there. I'd have some stuff to ask you.
Right.
But the thing is, I can't talk to Charles Spurgeon, but I've got a bunch of volumes back here where he is speaking, and it's in print. And like all these guys behind you are like my friends, my counselors. For when I study the Bible, I can I'll study for myself. And but then I can look at these guys and I can say, Jack, did you ever think about this?
I remember I was speaking to a pastor, and we were sort of conversing back and forth about what the most wise thing to do is in a given situation, right? And I was like, well, you should really read the Didache. They talk about this in the Didache. And his immediate response was, why should I read, some like extra biblical material on what? I was like, because it was written by a pastor, which you are, in the first century.
Yeah.
You don't have to agree. But you don't
right.
When you talk to Jack Young, you don't have to agree with
everything.
But you still want to have that conversation.
I don't even agree with myself 100% of the time. So why would I agree with you 100% of the time?
But if you had an opportunity to have a conversation with a pastor in the first century, which we all try to emulate for the most part. Why wouldn't you have that conversation?
Right. Multitude of counselors.
Yeah.
And so all this wisdom is available to me, and I'm able to glean it. I got two quotes, one for all the Baptists and one for all the Wesleyans, all the yes, John Wesley and B.H. Carroll. B.H. Carroll was a great Baptist historian, last century, president of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He said this: read history, all history, ancient, medieval, modern, civil, political, religious, biography, autobiography. All these books he absolutely devoured. It says about him, he read all science, all romance, all poetry. For at least 60 of his 71 years, he averaged reading 300 pages a day. During his latter years, even more than that. Only a little while before his death, he was known to average 1,000 pages a day. Let me see, skip forward here.
That's a hunk.
A ton.
1,000 pages.
1,000 pages a day. He always read history with a map before him and always kept near him the best and latest world atlases. He told one young preacher, "My boy, you are in great danger. You have no library and do not read." So John Wesley, this is him writing to another Methodist preacher. He says, "What has exceedingly hurt you in time past, nay, and I fear that to this day, is want of reading. I scarce ever knew a preacher that read so little, and perhaps by neglecting it, you have lost the taste for it. Hence, your talent in preaching does not increase. It is just the same as it was 7 years ago. It is lively, but not deep. There is very little variety. There is no compass of thought. Reading only can supply this. With meditation and with daily prayer. You wrong yourself greatly by omitting this. You can never be a deep preacher without it anymore, and also a thorough Christian. So begin. Fix some part of your day for this private exercise. You may acquire a taste for it where you had not before. What is tedious at first will afterwards be pleasant. Whether you like it or no, read and pray daily. It is for your life. There is no other way. Else you will be a trifler all your days and petty and superficial in prayer. So that's John Wesley.
One of the things that we talk about a lot, and it's like sort of like an axiom that people use a lot. The only people that don't like John Calvin and John Wesley are people that have not read John Calvin and John Wesley. Right. So what's interesting about that quote is when John Wesley's he's dressing down that guy super hard, right? Mm-hmm. But John Wesley was reading in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew like when he was 14, right? So what he might be talking about is someone's lack of reading might be that he's only reading 3 books a year, or maybe gets through his Bible once a year or whatever, because that's in a relative sense, right?
Absolutely.
So, John Wesley was known for his Theological Quadrilateral, which is just a square, and it was built on the Bible, reason, tradition, and experience. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so what's really interesting about that is that John Wesley really thought that you need to be able to read the Bible, and then you need to use a reason to read the Bible, because reading the Bible is an interactive experience.
Right.
And then you start to develop traditions based off that. And so sometimes he gets characterized as incorporating experience in place of the Bible. Like, it sounds like it works against sola scriptura. Yeah. But what he was really saying is you can't really rely on the Bible if you're not thinking about the Bible while you're reading it, right?
Sure.
And so, and then the tradition part, it's not saying like stick to this liturgy and that'll keep you in line. It means go read the Didache so you can have a conversation with a pastor in the first century. Right?
Yeah, and there's a certain knowledge that's passed down from century to century.
Mm-hmm. And that experience piece sounds to us IFB people like, oh, he sounds like a charismatic.
Right.
We use the same kind of language. You say, well, we pray and we ask the Holy Spirit to guide us as we study the Bible.
And God guides us through His Word. We're not saying apart or separate from His Word. Or we're not superimposing upon the Bible our experience. Or I know what the Bible says, but I experienced this with God. No, we're not saying that.
And then so that extra biblical reading is what helps enable your reason to be able to read the Bible better.
Sure. And Warren Buffett, who's a big reader, And just, think about this. Here's a quote. I don't know who said this, but it's true.
It was some book you read.
It was some book I read. And so the quote is this: the difference between the people that you look up to and the people that you don't is the people that you look up to read.
Yeah. And
so we've all heard that readers are leaders. Mm-hmm. So it's not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers. Right. And I found that to be absolutely positively true. Mm-hmm. Any influencers are also readers. I've never met an influencer who is not a reader. Mm-hmm. And so, I know everybody loves Bill Gates, but that guy's a reader. Yeah. He actually takes 1 week a year. And so he's employing tens of thousands of people, mm-hmm. and he still understands. I mean, he's busier than the president. He's got more responsibility in many ways than the president. I mean, he's got, all these companies and, but during that whole time, he's reading. He takes one think week mm-hmm. a year where he just goes, he goes all by himself to some little cottage. You can watch a show on Netflix. It's called Inside Bill's Brain, and talks all about this. And so here's a guy, and I think he's evil, but I still think there's lessons that you can learn from. I think he's got a God complex because he's accomplished so much that he thinks that he's in charge of mankind. But he goes and he has this think week where he brings just books and notepads and just reads and reads and reads. Yeah. And writes down notes.
Really quickly about Bill Gates, though, I know I've said this to you, but I think it's funny to say, like, imagine if Bill Gates actually did tithe 10% to his local congregation. Wouldn't that necessarily be the largest church in the world?
My dad today, because we're looking at this crisis pregnancy center there in Rochester, mm-hmm. and of course these are all like nonprofit, just run off giving of God's people. Mm-hmm. And if my dad looked at me, we're about to get in the car, he's like, "Don't you wish you were a millionaire?" Yeah. I know it wasn't just, for us, but to give. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Bill Gates just tithed 10%. He could do a lot of good.
Yeah. It'd be the biggest church in the country, in the world, maybe.
Right. I mean, he could support all the missionaries in the world just off his tithe. But anyway, Warren Buffett, another a friend of Bill Gates, a mover and a shaker. And I think he just recently gave like $50 billion to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or something like that. Yeah, he's given, because he's got so much money and he's trying to be philanthropic and control the world at the same time as well. Right. But Warren Buffett reads for 5 hours a day. Yeah. And there was an article, you could Google it, how Warren Buffett reads, I forget, like 300 books a year or something like that. Mm-hmm. Or I think it's 100 books a year. Right. And so he talks about it. He says, I'm a slow reader. I don't read fast. He says, I just take the time and do it. Right. And he said, I realize the value of it. It's like, now here's a guy who's made billions on the stock market. He said, it's like compound interest. Mm-hmm. He said, all the knowledge keeps on building upon itself. Yes. And we'll get in that when we talk about practical reading and reading comprehension. Like, I'm reading a book right now, and it's about Hitler's and the author's arguing that he escaped. Mm-hmm. And there was an escape plan. Like thousands of Nazis did flee to South America. Mm-hmm. Sometimes Mossad would come over and capture them, take them away, or whatever.
It's over in Argentina.
So it's about World War II, and it's bringing us up to the end there, and I'm 150 pages in. It's really easy for me to read a book on World War II because I've read many other books on World War II. Right. And I know who the main players are. Right. I know who the people are. I know who Erwin Rommel is. And, I know, they can mention any of Hitler's staff and Himmler or Bormann or whoever. And the Eagle's Nest, I know what the Eagle's Nest is. Yeah. And so it's compound interest. Right. When you read and then you read more stuff and you read more stuff, it all kind of builds that knowledge. Right. Upon itself.
So Hegel was a philosopher, and he had a dialectic method of philosophical development. And what he talked about was a thesis that develops into an antithesis, which is the opposite thought. And when those two run into each other, you end up with synthesis. And so that's something that I think is important in reading too, is, okay, here's the thought. What's the response to that thought? And then what you're talking about there is using your knowledge base to synthesize all that new information together. Right. And I think that he was Hegel was speaking on like a cultural and like social level, but like with your personal reading, it can work like that. Here's the thought. What is the opposing thought? And then what I'm going to take out of it is how everything falls out in the middle.
Right.
And so I think that's always been a big help for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you only read one book or just one person, now, I mean, the Bible's, if you're only read one book, read the Bible.
Yeah.
But if you have like one favorite book and it has one particular view on the world and you never heard the antithesis, whatever it says, to it, the opposite opinion,
Right.
the antithesis,
Right.
if you never heard that, then you have just one perspective.
Yeah, I remember
this
you gave, it was
situation.
about 2 weeks ago, you gave me a book to like review or read through. And I remember I texted you. I was like, the bibliography is garbage because, regardless of what this gentleman had to say about his particular topic,
Yeah.
none of the books that he read were anything other than what he already thought. It was all
Right.
confirmation bias. So it's
Right.
like, yeah, you read 20 books on this, but they were all things that already agreed with your point of view.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
And so it's like, if you're Republican and you watch Fox News, do you think you're going to switch to being a Democrat?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
Well, maybe you get so sick,
You'll just be angry at
But
the
I
end
mean,
of the day.
you're confirming what you already know. Now, again,
Or what you feel you already know.
I don't watch news. I don't usually watch news, but if I do,
If I do.
I'll watch Fox News, and then I'm like,
Yeah.
the drama queens get done, and I'm okay. Forget that. But yeah, it is important to read a multiple of books to be able to form
A well-rounded opinion,
well-rounded,
a nuanced,
well-versed
nuanced
opinion.
And, you then, and again, it goes back to what's called the hermeneutical cycle. Now I go back to the Bible, and I've developed a knowledge base. So like imagine a cup, right? I've got a 12-ounce cup over here. And if most Orthodox Christians would say the Bible has got an infinite reservoir of knowledge, right? So the only way that I can capture as much of that infinite reservoir of knowledge is to increase the size of my cup,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
so when I go to the Bible with a small cup, that's all I'm going to get out of it.
Yeah.
I'm only going to get the 12 ounces. Now, if I bring a 72-ounce big gulp, now I'm doing a little better, right? And so that's where that extra biblical reading helps you develop your knowledge base, and it helps you develop your critical thinking skills, and it helps you develop your reasoning. And so then, and also you can start to develop your own apologetics.
So you're reading Proverbs, and a just man falls 7 times and rises again. So I was talking to the youngsters earlier in the chapel over at Southeast in the Hemi there, and I started talking about Abraham Lincoln, because we were talking about Moses and how he must have felt at 80 years old. You heard the sermon. He's at the end of his life.
That sermon again?
Actually, in 2 parts. It was a 2-part series, but it was quite a bit different because I was talking to kids and I wasn't talking to men or anything.
Yeah.
And so I talked about Abraham Lincoln, and I was able to talk about his depression and how he said he would have killed himself, but the only thing that kept from
It's a good
doing
thing to
that,
bring up with kids.
yeah, hey, keeps our attention. And then at the end, I remembered I was talking about meekness is power under control.
Yeah.
And I pulled a story from a book, Mornings on Horseback. I read that a couple times by David McCullough.
Okay.
And it's about Theodore Roosevelt. And I could have talked about Theodore Roosevelt during the beginning of Moses and how he worked hard to strengthen himself, and and he was one of our very smartest presidents. I think he could read like 5 books a day.
He was insane. He was like a Renaissance man, post-Renaissance.
He would,
Yeah.
he would read the Peloponnesian Wars in Greek and like the volumes of it, and then he would read like every paper every day, like all the main papers. And they said that he would just sit there and he could read it. And John Quincy Adams was another very smart man, read thousands of volumes. But anyway, so I was able to pull, and it wasn't in my notes or anything,
right,
but it's just in the reservoir. So Theodore Roosevelt had a crippled sister, Mamie. And so dad comes home. They're a very wealthy family there in New York. Comes home with this giant steed. And the kids were like taken back by it. It was so powerful. And I said, how many would love it if your dad came home with a stallion?
Right.
And like a lot of, especially little girls, man, they're like, whoa, yeah. Like, and he said, who wants this horse? And little crippled Bamie, she's a little weak, and here's a horse that's 100 times her size,
Right.
100 times more powerful. And she grabs the reins and leads that horse and said, that is Bamie's horse. So there's 4 kids standing there. The crippled one comes forward,
right.
grabs the horse.
Yeah.
And so that meekness is your strength, your power, submitted to God. That stallion was submitted to Bamie. All
Right.
the strength was given over to Bamie. And I was talking about yielding to God. So that was just pulling something I
Right.
read
Yeah.
and illustrating the Word of God.
Right. It helps you convey the truth that's already in there.
Yes.
Right. And so you had that. You basically, instead of going to the Bible with a 12-ounce cup, you went to the Bible with a 72-ounce.
Right. So, reading exposes you to the world, and the Bible is the lens through which you interpret the world, and you can see the Bible lived out through every story and anything that's true and history, current things and things that you might read about. You can see that. But let's jump into practical.
Okay. I'm an impractical person, so this might be tough.
Yeah. So the practical aspect of reading, and a lot of people say, I don't have time to read.
Well, you said how Warren Buffett reads 5 hours a day, right? I was going to say there was a time in my life where I read 8 hours a day, and it was during COVID while I was unemployed, right? So, yeah, I could read 8 hours a day, 3 books a day, as often as I did it, right? But I work an 8-hour job, 10-hour job, depending, right? So how do I set aside 5 hours a day to read like Warren Buffett now? So how?
So there's 24 hours in a day. So 8 plus 5 is 13. You still have 11 hours left. So I can just try to help people out by telling them what I try to do. Here's something that's practical that we have done in our household, and depending on how your house is laid out, you might not be able to do this. But I encourage people to not have a TV in their living room. Like, have a TV room. I'm not against TV. I'm not against watching TV, but looking at a screen is not on the same level for your brain as reading. I mean, not even on the same chart. So it's nice if you don't have a screen temptation right in front of you.
Right.
So like at our house, to watch TV, you have to go to the TV room. And I do.
Right. Sure.
I will tonight. I'll watch something stupid and then go to bed. It's
Right.
like how I wind down. We'll watch it. I like stuff about 30 minutes. I love like Netflix type stuff that all those shows that are on TV, you don't have to watch any of the commercials and watch it. And
Some sort of Guy Fieri thing is good to just sort of decompress on.
Yeah, something that doesn't take too much brain waves, and
Right.
TV doesn't.
Right.
Chilling your brain out, and then you can go to bed. But I'll read in the morning, and then I'll read in the evening. And so in the morning, I do my Bible reading. I try to do my prayer time right there in the morning before I leave the house. And then, like yesterday in particular, this morning, I had about a half hour. So I grabbed the book and I just started reading. A lot of times in the evening, my routine is I get home, I'll have supper, we'll have devotions. Brad was over for supper. We had our little devotion, nothing too exotic. We're just reading through the Psalms together right now, doing a few different questions, and so that's some quality time with the kids. We kind of talk. Right. We do prayer request, prayer. It's not the amount of time. People talk about family time, and then they sit and watch the TV together.
Right.
But it's not family time. Quality time is when you have each other's attention.
Right.
So I feel like that's some quality time connection with my family. Then I go into the sunroom. That's like my spot. That's my lair.
Right.
And my chair's in there.
Your stack of study Bibles.
My reading stuff. I got study Bibles this deep in there. And then also I have just a ton of books and a lot of different books sitting around that chair. So usually in the evening that I'll be in there, I might do a little bit of writing, but I'll do reading. And I usually hang out in there till 8 o'clock.
Okay.
And that's like,
so you
that's
have a
my
very
cutoff
clear,
time.
you have a very clear, like,
that would be my
time set
routine
aside
for reading.
Yeah.
And then Mondays, if I'm not doing anything, like I don't come to church, I'll take calls and text or touch base with people. But if I'm at home, I probably get in 4 hours of reading on Monday, probably 2 hours in the morning because the kids are at school, and I'll read. And then using that evening, especially if I take the kids to swim practice, I'll sit up in the bleachers and I have my noise canceling headphones on and I'll just read.
Yeah. And I would say that what helped me find the time to read was to find something that I was interested in, right? So
Yes,
luckily for me, theology is really interesting. It's boring to about 95% of the people that are listening to this podcast or watching the video. However, when I found my itch and I started to scratch it, I'm like, oh, it feels pretty good, right? And so when I was younger, it was baseball. I love reading about baseball. And so diving into something that you find interesting. And
read what you love until you love to read.
Absolutely. That's a big motivator.
That's what your
me.
kids too. If your parents are trying to get your kids to read, like Timmy right now, he like geeks out on statistics and this, like whatever he's studying, sharks or guns or whatever.
Sure.
And so, if Julie and I were at Ollie's and they have discounted books, most of them are going to be like encyclopedia reference type books. And I'll give them to Timmy, and he reads them at night.
I think that's why Timmy and I get along so well. Because I was when I was in school, I would forego my curriculum and sit there with the encyclopedia and just read about stuff that I was interested in.
That would be Timmy, totally.
Yeah, because
him and Alexa's his girlfriend, and I think he wants to marry Alexa because she knows about everything. She knows about ligers.
That's so cool.
Sharks. And
yeah. So what's interesting is I'm going to put you on the spot because I know you use this in your sermons a lot. So when you define wisdom, you often use a certain illustration for wisdom. So if you can remember kind of like
knowledge applied. I mean,
knowledge applied.
That's the definition.
You would say wisdom is knowledge applied. And I always like this sense. So we're talking about two different senses of wisdom, but I'm contrasting them for a reason. So one thing about wisdom is, to me, wisdom is knowing the rules well enough to know when they don't apply, right? And so, so what's interesting when you say, oh, I set aside, I've got my cutoff time at 8 o'clock, or I set aside my 25 minutes, 35 minutes in the morning, then there's someone like me. So what if I'm not like Jack Young and I don't know? Okay. And so one of the things that's always helped me is this is just for me, I focus on the one book. I have a couple friends, and they're like, "Yeah, I've been trying to get in reading." I got
you only read one book at a time?
Yeah,
really?
Yeah.
Man, I'm terrible. Right. I have books all over. I'll set it down for a while, pick it back up.
I don't know how you ever remember that stuff.
I have to be really, really captivated to like not put a book down.
Right.
Now the church was kind enough to give me a Barnes and Noble. A couple people in the church. Can't say the church. Well, the church.
Yeah.
But a couple people in the
We're all
church.
The church, Jack.
Yes. Yeah. The invisible church gave me an invisible gift card. So, but yeah, it was like $50 for Barnes and Noble.
Oh, nice.
Which eBay is where you want to go, folks.
Yeah.
If you list eBay. But Barnes and Noble, I got Ryan Holiday's book, The Obstacle is the Way. Mm-hmm. I had off on Monday. Again, I read usually a lot of times for 4 hours. That I didn't put down. Mm-hmm. So I finished it Monday. It took me about 4 hours to read it.
Sure.
And then I got, it's 33 Strategies of Warfare by Robert Greene. And Robert Greene.
That sounds like the worst book I've ever heard in my life.
He's like an old friend, and it's you read 48 Laws of Power.
Yes.
And it's extremely dark.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's Robert Greene, man.
I needed a shower. I needed a shower after I read the book.
It's very dark, but he just verbatim interprets whatever laws.
Right.
And there's no like morality. It's not immoral. You could, a kid could read
amoral.
it. There's no,
Right.
It's just amoral observation of mankind. And it's from a lost Jew, not saved Jew, the Jewish man.
The reason I brought up wisdom, though, is regardless of what my practical advice is or your practical advice is, I think that what's really at the heart of that is knowing who you are.
Sure.
As an individual. Like some of us are different learners, right?
Absolutely.
And I know that you and I actually, prior to this podcast at your house, we were talking about the value or the value of, or if there is any, visual media. Like you were kind of saying, oh, isn't that kind of passive? You can kind of turn your brain off. And I'm like, my push it back is it kind of depends on who you are, right? Like I work with people that are purely visual learners, right? They can't read, right?
Sure.
And so if you're a visual learner, even just seeing the words as they're being read might help you, like closed captioning, right? That might help you. So, well, how on earth would you read a book, right, that is closed captioned in a video form? I would say YouTube. YouTube is a good
full
one.
of it,
right?
And the nice thing about YouTube is you can speed it up. and there's a lot of audio books on YouTube.
Yep.
If you look for them. So if you need the book read to you, and let's talk about that real quick, because that's one thing that you got me on, and I was like, blew my mind. It's like reading on steroids. I've done it with the Bible before, but Brad taught me listen to the audiobook and read it at the same time
while you read it. Yeah.
And it is crazy.
And if you're playing the audio while you're reading it, it kind of forces you to pay attention.
It does.
It does.
Because you've got two avenues it's coming in at.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And usually, and I had wrote about this, Ed, pastorjack.org. But the last one about reading, I put a little bit about listening audibly and reading. But yeah, and I put there, one of the notes is like about every 20 minutes, you can go back to John Adams, right into John Quincy, saying take a walk in between your reading and in your studies, kind of move around. I said about 20 minutes, and this is stuff you can find these lists that I produced. I've seen lists, I've seen videos.
Right.
About 20 minutes, you're good for concentration, and then you should water the plants or feed the fish or something, and then come sit back down for another 20 minutes.
Make a coffee
drink some coffee or whatever. But with audio going and reading, I could probably do that for an hour straight without stopping.
And I've noticed that when I'm listening to the audio while I read, I am more aware of when I stop paying attention. When you zone out and you're like, wait a minute, hold on. I know that I don't know what he's talking about right now. And then you just rewind a little bit.
That's right.
Pick up back. Now, I don't necessarily.
Where do you get your audio files from?
Usually from Audible.
Okay.
However, like I said,
that's where I get mine from.
What's really cool about theology is that a lot of the stuff is in public domain. So there will be a lot of audio versions of different books on YouTube that you can just listen to.
Yes.
And then if the other trick I do is I haven't used what's the word processor for Apple? I'm sure it does it, but
I use Microsoft Word.
Okay. On your Apple device?
Yes, on my Apple device.
Okay, so we're speaking the same language there. So what I'll do is maybe I have a text that I would like to listen to. I will go to the website, copy paste the text, throw it into Word, and just have Word read it to me.
Yeah. If you have Microsoft Word, it will read you.
Yeah, and a lot of people's cell phones actually have a accessibility option to have text to speech on it. So you could, even without doing any of the copying pasting, you'll have to listen to some garbage about this picture, that picture.
Yeah.
But the phone will start reading what's on the web pages to you.
Yeah, I have a preacher friend, Samson Ryman, and he's got dyslexia really bad. Always had it his whole life, and even when he reads the Bible from the pulpit, he struggles reading because he can't follow the words. So he has this app on his phone, and I think you get on any smartphone, an app where you can take a picture of any page, and it'll just read you the page.
It'll read it. Yep.
Yeah,
it's pretty crazy.
Yeah,
and then kind of going back to where we started a little bit is can you imagine if Martin Luther had something like that?
I don't know if he'd be as smart as he was. I don't know.
You wonder? I always wonder about that. Like, would his brain be turned off like ours is, or would he be supersized? Would Spurgeon have read 50,000 volumes that way? You know what I'm saying?
I don't know, because we don't have any, Spurgeon. I mean, that level,
right?
Right now, I don't know why.
Right.
I mean, Martin Luther and Calvin and all these guys, they were like mega minds.
Right.
Mega.
Right.
And I just don't think that
that's the nature versus nurture thing. Like, were they born that way, or were they raised that way?
Yeah, who knows? So work it in with your schedule, the book, and any habit that you want to create. You got to grease the skids. It's like if you want to go running in the morning, put out your running clothes, get your banana out, get your water, make it so easy.
Yeah.
And then anything you're trying to quit smoking. Well,
get up early in the morning so you don't have to skip your run to go to work.
Yeah. So any bad habit, put all sorts of roadblocks.
Right.
In between. They say if you're too much of a gamer, what you should do is say, fine, I'm not going to get rid of my game system because I'm just going to buy another one.
Right.
But every time I play the video games, I've got to unplug it, disconnect it from the TV and put it in the closet.
I worked in restaurants for 20 years, right? And what's funny is you probably have heard this before. American plates keep getting bigger, right?
Right.
And so in the 80s, the buffets used to be really successful, like Old Country Buffet or Ponderosa or those types of brands, right? Mm-hmm. Sure. But they were successful and the plates were 8 to 10 inches wide. What happened throughout the 90s and the 2000s is that they started making larger and larger plates, and then people started needing larger and larger plates. And so people would go up there and grab $40 worth of steak or whatever.
Yeah.
Or $40 worth of chicken wings, go back to the table and then come back a few more times because they just kept throwing the plate, right?
Yeah.
And so what they also found was, if say you go to a restaurant and you get all you can eat shrimp, well, how many times does the server ask you if you want more shrimp?
Oh, she slows it way down.
Maybe once, right?
Yeah.
Because as long as I just don't even bring it up, you probably won't ask for it. Right. But if she asked every time you went to the table, you would say yes.
Yes.
Yep. Just like they say, "Oh, would you like a refill with your drink?" Yes. And you get this much more Coke than you had before.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Those roadblocks are important when you're establishing those
right.
habits.
Yeah. And so you grease the skids for good habits. So, put the book next to your chair. And again, I would, if you can, like some of your houses are not set up that way, but, get the TV, out of the living room into the TV room. And that way that you can kind of create an environment inside your home that's not as based on a screen. Mm-hmm. And you don't have the temptation to turn the power on. And then you have that book right by your chair. And I think as Brad was saying, read what you love until you love to read. That's so important.
Right.
I know C.S. Lewis, our buddy there, he said that he had a hard time reading a new book because he couldn't stop reading the books that he already loved.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so if I would say that if you're reading a book and you just like don't get it, it's just too hard. Start a different book.
Yeah, it's okay. You don't have to finish any book. The fact that you started reading it is great.
Yeah.
I don't know how much time we have, but I know that what you were saying is important. Now, what you do is impressive to me because you talk about reading multiple books at a time. How on earth do I read 3-4 different books, maybe sequentially, maybe not, and remember anything about those? Because that sounds crazy to me.
Okay, so like in school you have several different classes. When you're preaching, especially if you're preaching all the services, as a pastor, you have 4 different things going on at the same time.
Okay.
And then you can throw on a podcast and throw on a few chapels and whatever.
Right. Yeah.
You might speak on 8 different things in a week. And so I can pick up a book I haven't looked at in a while, and I remember what's going on.
So you just sort of flex that muscle.
Yeah, I think, and I have for a long time because all through college I'm doing different classes and I'm studying for 2 different tests the next day.
Oh, okay.
And so it's just been scattered. But I know some people like yourself that, man, if they pick up a book that is going to be the book until it is done. Yeah. Where I have several different books like on my nightstand. I've probably got, several different books, like maybe my poor wife, But I probably have 6 different books on my nightstand, and I probably have about 25 different books next to my chair.
Oh man.
But some of them too are books that are going to stay there. Like I have Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius has been around for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. He actually wrote a self-help book to himself. And it was he was a Stoic philosopher and a great emperor. Thomas Jefferson, when he died, he had Marcus Aurelius right there. And, George Washington, when he was in Valley Forge, he put on a play about Cicero. And, he was a big Marcus Aurelius fan. Mm-hmm. So I'm keeping Marcus Aurelius there. And then I've got The 5 Rings by Musashi.
Yeah.
Man, I love samurais. And so here I'm thinking, here's a guy that lived like 700 years ago, the greatest swordsman ever, and wrote these down these pearls of wisdom on how to sharpen any craft. I'm thinking the book has survived 600 years and it's still like being studied.
I've heard you mention that before. Like you'll often refer people to Matthew Henry's commentary, and you'll say it's been tried and true for 500, 600 years. Like, of course it's good.
600 years from now, guess what they're still going to be looking at?
They're still going to be looking at Matthew Henry's commentary.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I hear when you say that is that a lot of those, you're able to sort of juggle those books because you are interested in all those things simultaneously.
Yeah. And so like, for instance, Robert Greene's like a friend, and his chapters, like I'm reading the 33 Strategies of War, are laid out like I'm familiar with. I can hear his voice in my mind, and that's what I talk about with reading comprehension. if you have a hard time with reading comprehension, there's a few tricks that you can do to like accelerate your reading comprehension astronomically.
Yeah.
If it's a current book, I guarantee you on YouTube, the author has lectured somewhere about the book, and they will tell you the most important thing about their book, the thesis of their book, the reason why they wrote it, the
done radio and TV interviews about it.
Oh yeah, so you can look on podcast apps, and so if I really want to digest a book that I know it's going to be hard for me, I will listen to several podcasts by that author with different interviewees, and then have them talk about their book to me. I can read a summary on Wikipedia. Again, YouTube is going to have summaries of different books, the popular books, and that way I have the author's voice in my mind. I can actually picture them as if they're talk. I don't picture them talking to me, but I can hear their voice.
Right. Yeah. For me, I've always looked at reading as an interactive discussion between myself and the author.
Yes, I think that's very important.
Yeah.
And so I know how Brad's mind works. I know how mine works. I'm a pastor, so I have to see the best in people. and Brad's kind of got like the cop mind. He can tear apart an argument.
Yeah. I actually
if I read a book, I'm like, there's some good parts in that. And then Brad read about there's some bad. This guy's messed up.
Like I said, yeah, I sent you. I was like, well, I mean, the books. I don't disagree with everything he said, but this is not a good. This is not a well researched piece of work. So I have in my hand these critical thinking cards, and people think that you have to be really smart to think critically.
No,
and they also think that the word critical is bad, right? And if you just replace the word critical with analytical, you're along the same line.
And that's what critical really means.
Yes. Yeah. So
it's logic and analytics. Yeah.
Right. And this goes along, you want to know yourself, right? And so like, for instance, I did a lot of research and thinking about what are my cognitive biases and what are my fallacies that I use. I fall back on the fallacy, which is if you and I are having a discussion and then I hear you using a lot of logical fallacies, I will dismiss what you're saying as probably being wrong because I hear so many fallacies.
Yes.
Now, you can be right for the wrong reason.
Right. And even,
which means that I'm being fallacious.
Pretty much, yeah. What's the expression that even fools are right some of the time?
Yep, yeah.
You're right.
But
if somebody's logic is off on other things, and they're not a sound analytical thinker,
doesn't mean that their point was wrong.
Yeah.
However, I know that when I'm reading somebody, I'll get kind of irritated with their fallacious reasoning, and then start dismissing their points.
And I like listening to somebody, even if I disagree with them, if I know they're a well thought out person.
Exactly.
Because if they make a point, they're just not throwing it out there.
Right.
They have a lot of reasoning behind that point, even if they're wrong.
Now,
like if you said, "How come you believe that?" They could tell you, exactly why.
If you've ever been in trouble at work, right? Say somebody reported you for something, and then your boss sat you down and said, "Now this is their side of the story." And then this is your side of the story. And then your boss will always say, and I know that the truth is somewhere in the middle. That's actually called the middle ground fallacy. Right? The truth is probably not, it's somewhere in the middle, but it's not the middle.
It could lean all the way to one side or all the way to another.
Exactly. Yeah. So these critical thinking cards, you can Google them. They're super cool. And if you have that idea that you need to be really smart to be a critical thinking person, or analytical style person when you read, get these cards. Introduce yourself to critical thinking, because then you can start to have that interactive conversation with the author. And like you said, get familiarized with the author so that you start having the conversation. I know when you
that's a tip for reading is I always keep another thing that helps me, and this is I take ownership of the book. I think there's something, particularly for men. I've never been a woman. I don't plan on being one, so I don't know.
If you're interested in switching, I know some people.
Okay, so men, there's a masculinity of taking a pen and marking on things.
Yeah.
And this really helps you take ownership of something. And I always keep markers or a pen nearby. And if somebody says something that doesn't make sense to me, I'll draw a question mark and I'll write like a question off to the side. And I buy used books all the time on eBay.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of the people that do that out there. They'll underline something.
Oh, it's the best.
I love it.
I love that, because when you buy a used book that's been marked up by somebody else, you have that interactive conversation with the author, like I was talking about.
And also the person, you're like, why did you underline that?
I have a Bible. and I bought it because it was super cheap. It's a study Bible, and I was like, oh, I can get this study Bible super cheap. And it was owned by a chaplain, a military chaplain. And what was interesting is all the notes in his margins are in John, Psalms, and Proverbs. So I was like, oh, he never really taught. Yeah, he didn't really get into like
no deep dive in there.
Women's ordination in 2 Timothy or anything like that, right? So
exactly.
So it's you start to have that conversation, and then you start building that knowledge base on what did this person say, which I was going to also say, and I know I drive you crazy with this and all my friends. Like I myself, in order to help me comprehend information that I've read, is I engage with it however I can. Like I might want to talk to Jack about it, or the other thing I like to do is develop a project around that information. So I know have a master list of like your notes and stuff that you've acquired throughout the time. I have a master list, but mine is in HTML format that I code myself. Because
so Brad, when he's studying something or reading something, he sends me like 45 texts. And it's usually in the evening because that's, now he works during the day and so he'll be studying something, and then I'll be riding around with Julie and like another text from Brad. How many more do you think he'll send?
Streaming in.
But he's putting in his thoughts, and I always think that he's articulating what he thinks about, because if you put it down in text or write it out.
And that's because I know enough about myself that unless I bounce my thoughts off of another person, I won't catch things that other person might, right?
Yeah.
Because I think differently than Jack, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
Right. We don't want to be the same person.
Right. And so, and then I actually, I was remembering that because I wanted to mention how in the Great Commission, sometimes people will say, oh, we were commissioned to reproduce ourselves in the Great Commission. No, we're commissioned to reproduce people who imitate Christ.
Teaching them all things.
Yeah. I don't need any more Brads and Jack. Yeah. We don't need any more Jacks. We're good with the one, right?
That's right.
And so
maybe too many.
So I think the ideal way to comprehend information and read is communally, and bouncing ideas. And I'm
in church. I'm for like small groups talking around the Bible. I don't like not in the ladies. The ladies group on Friday does a book, and that's great. I'm glad. And it's usually, and it is a Bible study book.
Right.
But I know for every Wednesday we have a book like that we're going through, mentoring and modeling. I think it's Carrie Schmidt or somebody who writes this book. You go in a chapter and we're talking about that. Right. We have our highlights, and it's just at the beginning of the staff meeting, but we're all reading the same thing and we're balancing these ideas, and it's awesome.
Yeah, because I will catch things that you won't. You will catch things, and the stronger your network is with those people, the bigger your cup is to go back to the Bible with.
Right.
Yeah,
and so you don't necessarily need to join a book club or anything, but it is, it is nice to read a book at around the same time as somebody and discuss it. And then, but if you're not reading with anybody else, there's tons of books that I read solo and Brad reads solo, but you're underlining or highlighting different things in your book. Now, what I do is a little bit different than Brad. I have a stack of it keeps on getting higher, and I'll get one or two down, and it keeps on going up. But I have a bunch of books that are all highlighted, and what I'll do is I'll write down those highlights or summarize those highlights in my mastermind journal, and I love that journal. It's very cool.
Yeah, and so you have this list, and what I was trying to get to earlier was I assimilate another discipline with that information, which I should know how to write some HTML. So I will learn to write some HTML so that I can incorporate my notes into an HTML format, right? And so marrying that synthesis of marrying those two disciplines will help me remember, because I remember that when I wrote down those notes about Philemon, that it was broken 3 times and I had to go through the code and fix it, right? Yeah. And so now I know exactly what Philemon 4-6 is all about.
HTML code. That is not I'm only going to read what I love, and I'm not going to love that book. So.
Or whatever that is, right? So like when I have an interest in baseball statistics, I'll develop a spreadsheet that will analyze the statistics or whatever. Yeah. That's one thing that does help me with my comprehension, which is marry disciplines sometimes. Like you do something with this information and then it becomes part of like your larger knowledge base, your working knowledge.
So they have a you have a direct purpose. Yeah. So let's say that you have a relative that has cancer. Let's say it's your mother, your spouse, or whatever, and you say, "Man, I'm going to learn all the information I can on cancer." You know, you library, you check out 5 books, you sit there and you read them, and this is why I don't like library books, is I can't highlight them. But there is ways to digitally copy, or you would write down, and so you're going to orchestrate some sort of there is a why. Which helps you to read,
right?
Because you're developing something, you're working on something,
and that depends on the style of learner you are. Like those people that are called cognitive learners, they can literally assimilate information because they want the information.
Yeah,
that's not me at all. I need to do something with it.
You develop it somehow,
right.
And so I mean, I do that a lot for church work as far as reading for different. Like I'm reading Alfred Edersheim's the Temple right now, and that's pretty serious reading. But we're doing the Tabernacle, not the Temple, but we're doing the Tabernacle on Wednesday night, and so it's kind of playing into that. And I have an opportunity through writing and preaching to develop a lot of this material.
Right.
One of the things that I learned, I don't know if there's going to be still, hour and 15 minutes in, but one of the things I learned recently, and I did call my friend Jim Alter up. I was like, "Did you know this?" And he didn't know that. So on my notepad, I was showing Brad earlier that in my Apple phone, underneath my notepad, you can actually scan documents. You can highlight the text inside that document. Like I could take a book, and it takes a picture of it. Yes, it's a picture, but you can actually highlight the words and copy them over into like Word Publisher file.
Yeah, basically
Amazing.
does an instant
it's
PDF.
It's a digital. Well, it's like a digital scan, so it's even better than a PDF.
Right.
And so you can highlight that way. So the dialogue. There was something else that I was going to make mention of. Let's see. Buy books on eBay.
Yeah, buy books on eBay is good. And again, theology is cheap because a lot of it's in public domain. So like theology is an underrepresented part of American Christianity. So if you're curious to even what I'm talking about, I encourage you to look into it because it's all about reading the Bible better.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so
that logical reasoning applied to Scripture. Absolutely. I think we'll end there. I know there was something. Of course, we'll end it, and then I'm like, oh, we didn't talk about whatever. But hour and 15 minutes, that's good.
Right.
Thanks so much for being on, Brad.
I appreciate you having me.
Awesome subject, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we could talk all night about books.
Yeah,
but,
we're really annoying like that.
Yeah, we'll end it right there. Thank you so much today for watching this podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Also, if you'd like to reach out to us by way of email, you can email us at pastoralthoughtsmail@gmail.com. And if you'd like to, I do write a blog, and you can subscribe to that at pastorjack.org. Thank you, God bless you, and have a great day.